Can you hear me? Eddie,
Yep.
this is amazing. I love technology. It's my favorite.
It
Oh
looks
my
that way.
goodness. This is awesome. So this is not normally how I come to you, but hey, we're here nonetheless. Second consecutive show with technical difficulties, but we're managing to get through it. It's so great to see you. How are you, buddy?
I'm good. And you?
Never better. It's a Monday. We're in the mortgage business. My company's still in business. Yours is thriving. Both of our companies actually still thriving. But what a ride it's been the last few years. For you, you made a pivotal change to your business model. You were focused on retail for a very long time, had your hand in wholesale,
hmm
but made the conversion from one into the other completely. What's that been like for you, and how are you guys doing at EPM?
What has that been for me? It's been a huge relief. I'm not going to lie. I think it's a model that is, if you know what you're doing, and that seems to be the tough part about it, is something that you could really scale and grow and aggregate all the supply that's out there. I think it's more sustainable. And even though I'll always be an originator at heart, not having to deal with individual loan officers that are actually, associates of EPM is a different shift, and it's a different welcome shift.
Yeah, I bet. I'm still here. Don't worry. I'm just adjusting my light. I figure you want to see more of me, Eddie, not less of me. Um, so I'm doing that right now. But you know what? I've really enjoyed getting to know you. I mean, I consider you a friend in the business now.
Agreed.
And boy, for the longest time, to me, you were a larger than life guy. I would see you at these conferences and, wonder what he's like, because I've seen you put a lot out there in the social media ether, and you're very good on stage, and you're a tremendous leader. You've done so much great work for both nonprofits and the Mortgage Bankers Association and MorePac. I mean, you've had your hands in so many things and continue to be dedicated to this industry. Um, your story is amazing too. I mean, first generation Cuban American. There's just so many directions we can go in right now. I think I'd like to start with just your willingness and desire to always be giving back, because I think that's kind of rooted in who you are anyway.
I think what a lot of people take for granted is those that paved the road for them and the responsibility that you owe them. I think people have a tough time with the word owe, and you do owe it. Because if you're essentially, as the metaphor, now on, say, a 4-lane highway, somebody had to have done that for you. My rooted is not as much on giving back as it is more on pay it forward, because when you're doing that, you're really paying homage to those that laid the road, because you've taken the oath of responsibility, which I think is the biggest oath you have to take as a leader, to then leave it a 8-lane highway, a 6-lane highway, whatever it is, to make it better for the next generation. Because in the end, all you're doing through that process is making it a better experience for consumers. And the irony behind it that I think a lot of people forget is that you're a consumer as well. We're all consumers,
True.
and
So
you have
true.
to think
Yeah.
like that. And maybe you're not a consumer in a mortgage, but what happened if, how would you want a mortgage professional to treat, your grandparent, your aunt, your kid, your parent, best friend? And you have to think like that. It's no different than if you go to a restaurant, you expect to be treated with a certain level of respect. And it's the same way, even though you're not in the restaurant business. And I think that's what people forget about paying it forward, that it's really paving the road and laying it for those that did great work, to pay it forward.
Yeah, and your work with the Mortgage Bankers Association goes very far back. Why
Mhm.
the alliance with that organization, and what does it mean to the business?
So
Huh.
trying to get me to tear jerk. I got you. It goes back to when I met Dave Stevens. That had a significant impact in my life. My life did change from that moment. I had the privilege of getting to meet him early on when he was CEO of the MBA in 2011 at a conference. And from there, I saw what the organization was doing. I saw what they were really representing from not only an advocacy, because that's when, Dodd-Frank got passed and the industry was viewed as Freddy Krueger, as I like to say. We were getting the blame for everything. Everything was going on.
Yeah,
I'm not going to sit here and tell you that we didn't have our responsibility on it. However, a lot of people had responsibility that nobody ever wants to talk about, but that's the harsh realities, including, even though I'm very protect and support a lot of consumers that lived their life spending way more than they had. And then eventually that bubble came and popped and affected a lot of people. I saw what he was doing. I believed in his vision. I slowly got involved. I was allowed in the 2013 Future Leaders program. And then that just changed a lot. That changed my involvement. That changed my ability to get to the table. Then I started being a panelist for the Future Leaders. And then after that, I got asked to be on the board, more PAC, IMB, just a lot of different roles. And the best part about it all, I wouldn't have gotten to be able to meet so many people. I think that's the advantage when you are involved, is you get to meet so many great humans. Sure, you have to deal with some shenanigans. However, I learned a long time ago, anything great in life, you have to learn how to deal with that. Part of the reason I jokingly call myself the chief wrestler of egos, because that's what you're really dealing with. Let's not kid ourselves about any of that. I just believed in that mission, and I still believe in the mission. I still think they do a wonderful job, not only for the industry, but really protecting the industry and promoting it so it can thrive for the consumer. So the consumer is thought about.
You talk about surviving, and as I read about you and got ready for this, there's a quote out there floating around. I just want to be someone that makes a difference in my community. You live by that, and why does it mean so much to you? And talk about where sort of you've been and where you want to go.
Look, when my family came to this country, there were a lot of good people that took care of them. There are a lot of good people that took care of me in my life. Just for some examples, a lot of people aren't aware of this. I know that when you're Cuban, everybody expects everybody to be from Miami or Cuba. However, what a lot of people don't realize is when a lot of people came here after the second revolution in Cuba, 1959, depending on when they came here, Miami was a sleepy Jewish retirement community. And a lot of those Jewish individuals and business owners and families really took in the Cuban community, understood their plight, and really supported them. My father, the first person that ever gave him a job, because he was homeless his first week in this country, was a Jewish individual that owned a business and gave him those opportunities, helped him get on his feet. When I got to grade school, I didn't know English. But we live in a world that everybody wants to be so divisive. And here I am in the early 80s in inner city Atlanta, and I had a very young black male and a very young white male who helped me learn English when our teacher paired me together. So I've had the privilege, because it's really a privilege, to have seen the very positives of humanity. I'm never going to tell you there aren't negativities. However, if you focus on the negativity, that's all you're ever going to get. I've known the strength, I've known the honor, and I've known the dignity of others. And that's what I choose to represent. And that's also what I choose to try to highlight and empower in others.
And you've got that grit quality. I know that I was talking to a dear friend of mine just earlier today about that trait, right? And you don't get grit unless you've been through a lot. You've been through a lot, and you've made your fair share of mistakes too. I mean, you made a comment that I read about, talking about that you've made more mistakes than you'd like to admit. We all have, right? But what is it about you that makes you so willing to have that humility gene and to share not just the wins, but the losses and the lessons from them?
I think it goes back to playing baseball. I think what a lot of people don't realize is that baseball may be the greatest sport when it comes to life, because if you're 3 for 10,
yeah, you're a Hall of Famer. Yeah, you're great.
You fail 70% of the time. And I think it also represents life, because when you're at the plate, you have to understand the rules and the code of life, just like you have to understand the code of baseball. If you showboat on a home run, somebody's going to get hit with a pitch later. That's just the rules of the game. If you hit a ball 500 feet, a little bit to the left, a little bit to the right, you can't move them. And a lot of people want to move the goalposts, as they say. You can't move the foul pole lines. I think that allowed me, because the irony behind it is then when you're out in the field, you can't really make many errors or you're booted. So I think that really represents life exceptionally well. I think you have to understand that you're going to strike out a lot. I think you need to learn from the strikeouts. I think it's perfectly okay to talk about the strikeouts. Ironically, one area that a lot of people don't talk about the strikeouts is in gambling. I laugh because all I ever hear is people going and winning. It's not a multi-billion-dollar industry because people win. I think a lot of people, they may have won one night in gambling, but the overall net effect is it's not really rigged for you to win. Life is going to have struggles. Life will have some past. Life may have some things that I think people use the word fair a little bit too much. That's not fair. It's really, is it just or unjust? There's a big difference there. So you have to share that. People appreciate the non-perfection. That's why I think social media can be strong when it's done the right way. That it's perfectly okay to make a mistake on your video and not care. It's okay to misspell, because that's going to show a lot more authenticity and intentionality than if everything's so crisp, so perfect, and just looks a little bit too perfect to be true. Because we all know that not to be a reality. No different than, we've all seen the airbrushed pictures that people put out there, and they remind me of glamour shots when we were, I'm showing our age right now, in the 90s, glamour
Yeah.
shots, these done up pictures, and you're like, who is that person?
I wish my glamour shots were in that decade, my friend. I'm a decade before that. Yeah. You know? So ironically, I met you for the first time at Dave Stevens' funeral service. And, he meant a lot to me, he meant a lot to you. He meant a lot to many. And I remember in our first encounter, within, I don't know, 5 minutes or so, you were talking to me about body language, because I think that I was like maybe crooked, standing to the side, and you're like, you got to square up, and I'm like, tell me about that. And then we went to dinner a couple of months ago, and you've got, you're tracking your sleep, and you're getting your blood drawn all the time, and you're doing all these things to ensure that you have not misplaced one detail as you continue to evolve. I'm fascinated by that, because I don't do any of that stuff, although I do now pay more attention to my body language, and I thank you for correcting me right out of the box. That's when I fell in love with you. I'm like, hey, this is my kind of guy, just tell it like it is, right up front to somebody. Just be you, be authentic you. But what's behind that sort of attention to such finite detail?
That's where most of the failures exist. I think a lot of people are good. And if you're good, good's like being 90%. Great is being about 95%. And elite is being like 97%. So what are we really talking about here? You're talking about from good to elite, 7%. That's not that drastic of a jump. And it's those minute details that really added up. Jeff Bezos, because, you hear all that, even though I'm wearing a shirt that says hustle and hustle culture. They're like, you got to work and not get sleep. It's like saying you need to talk on your phone repeatedly and not expect to recharge it, or it's gonna die on you. I understand that mindset. I'm not going to sit here and say that I didn't do it, because I sure as heck did it. There was a point in time in my life I was living off 4 or 5 hours of sleep. I thoroughly know this to be fact today. Had I gotten more sleep and paid more attention to things I paid today, but I allowed youth to be my cover, because when you're younger, you can absorb all that better, I'm sure a lot of my mistakes and my decisions would have been more sharper and better, because I think Jeff Bezos was the one that said that I have to sleep 8 hours, or at least be in bed 8 hours, because my 16 hours on, I need to make 2 or 3 crucial decisions a day, and I need to be in the right frame of mind. You need to understand yourself, not just be yourself, but understand the chemistry works differently for different people. Certain foods affect people a different way, certain exercises, what your genetic dynamic is. And if you tap into that, it's not only that you're going to be the best version of yourself, you're going to be able to, those that care, that you're lifting them up for their best interest, not yours. You're going to be able to do it better, quicker, and simpler. You really are. And it's going to be less static.
I want to get into your foray into the wholesale waters, because you've got the UWMs and the Rocket Mortgage, and there's been a lot of mudslinging publicly.
Sure.
Where do you line up when it comes to that, and when you see that kind of rhetoric going back and forth? Are you tangled up in the middle anywhere?
I'm not, and I have a different perspective than most when it comes to those two companies. There's a very gangland turf war when it comes to those two companies and the people that support them. And I have a different perspective than most when it comes to it. Probably a little bit controversial. I'd say it's more different.
Oh, come on, it's killing me. I'm on the edge of my seat. What is it? That's a big buildup.
When I say turf land and gangs, where I went to high school, I actually knew real gangbangers. I knew real thugs. So I always laugh a little bit when people are playing tough guy in the business world, because nowhere different than any inner city. I mean, come on, man. But that's not to judge. I think it's real easy to judge people. That's why I say it's really hard to think. Too many people feel, act, and then think, and you got to feel and really, really think. It's okay to feel something, but why are you feeling that? What's going on? Do you just need a break? I think Rocket and UWM have been good for the industry. Yep. I said it. I think that from what UWM has done in wholesale was 2 out of 3 loans were done in wholesale when I got in the business, and they just carried that on. Back then you had the countrywides and all that, but the financial crash took a lot of people down, and they kept that barometer going. And I think consumer direct is still a great option. That is what Rocket is known and really pioneered. And I don't know if they were the first ones, but they were definitely the first ones to get it really, really right and really, really effective. I think those are very good. I think both models are very, very good for the consumer. And anybody who says otherwise is either A, not willing to put in the work, B, doesn't care to put in the work, C, just wants to create some sort of divisive behavior because that does, I hate to say it, does generate support and followers. But you got to hear both sides and then think for yourself, and then you become a leader instead of just a follower. I think both of them have been good organizations. I don't know about their own personal challenges between them. That's really on them. I'm not a guy that gets into the drama triangle. I don't really care. It's a waste of time to me. Because if you just focus on yourself and you keep getting better, I promise you, anybody who ever made it to the top really, really did just focus on themselves and keep getting themselves better.
What are your thoughts on brokers are better?
That's
the slogan.
It doesn't really exist anymore.
Yeah, I understand, but it did a lot of damage. I mean, when it first came out, you were mostly on the retail side, right? Now you flipped over to the wholesale side, and while it has been
I had wholesale back then when it came out, I still had wholesale. I had a wholesale channel. It wasn't as big as what my retail channel was, but
yeah, that's what I mean. I mean, once it flip-flopped, you then, now you're all of a sudden on that island, or at least the brokers are better, wanted to put people on an island. So even though it doesn't exist, sort of your thought on what it did, and is there a path forward for everybody to be working together, the all of us mantra?
There's definitely a path for everybody to move forward with all of us, or as I like to say, borrowers are best, because I do believe it's got to be in the best interest of the consumer and really putting the consumer better. I don't like the word better because, once again, that's a very divisive word, because when you say better, you're basically saying that you're better than
somebody else. Yeah. When you're best, you want to be the best you can be. Yeah.
And look, and me and you have talked about that. Like, I have no challenge at all. I'm supportive of the brokers are best, because I've never gone into a restaurant that's really known for their food that didn't list that they have the best chicken parmesan or the best pizza or the best hamburger. Nobody's going to say they have the worst.
Right.
I think
truth.
That.
That's true.
And I also want to say this. I think with the whole brokers are better, I think they wanted to bring a certain narrative out, which is, I think, something that's not really glossed upon, is after the financial crash, brokers got blamed for everything. Mortgage brokers got blamed. It was Jamie Dimon who, in October of 2007, who said that he had pulled out of the channel and that mortgage brokers were the ones bringing in all the terrible loans. Once again, I touched on this subject earlier. It was guidelines. It wasn't poor underwriting. It wasn't poor originators. It wasn't poor. It was poor standards.
Yep.
Guidelines. And nobody wants to talk about that. And that is also, because I'm always, to your point, and I appreciate what you said earlier, as I call it how it is everybody was guilty. The industry was guilty. The people providing the capital, because that's the irony I always found about blaming brokers for it, is they had to get it from a lender, but nobody wants to talk about that. And consumers. I remember a consumer myself that we had done a loan for and paid off a lot of debt. And then she calls us to try to cash out again. And she had inherited this house, mind you, inherited this house, and wanted to strip another 20% out. And she was getting put in this pick-a-pay, AKA pay option, AKA negative AM loan. And look at this payment. I said, look, when that adjusts, you're not going to be able to afford this payment. I already know your debt ratios. Like, you don't need to do this. Well, when 2007, 2008 happened, I think I got a phone call around 2009. She had done it. She was way underwater at that point. She had inherited the house from her father, who had died. And she was crying in tears. And I was like, look, I truly feel for you. However, we told you not to take out that loan, and you did it anyway. And that's the bitter side of responsibility. You do have to face it. That's part of the reason when earlier you said that I own my mistakes, because you have to own your mistakes. You have to have that level of self-responsibility.
Eddy, what does this business look like in 5 years? How's it going to change?
I think there'll be less people. I think there'll be continued more attrition. I think with technology, I think more people can do more loans with less. I think the industry has moved in a very positive fashion when it comes to risk factors and understanding what generates risk and the consumers. I think the next 5 years are not going to be what people believe. I know everybody is hoping for this massive windfall of refis, and I'm not going to tell you there may not be a spike. 74% of people are below 4%, and we don't have enough inventory. So if we had a oversupply, people would eventually sell their houses and move up. That'd be very normal. House prices would regulate. So I still believe that real estate will keep appreciating. I don't see interest rates dropping to what, once again, people are hoping for, because once again, to get below that 4%, you never got there without quantitative easing. I don't see quantitative easing coming back. If anything, I see quantitative tightening, because we've seen that in the last year, where when rates go a little bit down, the Fed releases some more and tightens it up, and rates go a little bit up. I just don't see a lot of that changing. I see single-digit growth for the next 5-7 years till eventually we catch up on inventory, and then that'll start working itself out. However, I do believe it's very sustainable. You may not see crazy growth numbers. However, when was that good for the culture of the industry? Because then organizations were forced to hire. And like it or not, regardless of what people really want to say, if you're forced to hire and then volume gets cut in half, people have to go. And I understand that some people like to talk about, oh, layoffs are horrible. Well, putting people on PIPs and then getting them out that way, but still reducing your numbers, the same thing, guys. So
I mean, that's the truth. That's the truth.
Let's not try to sell us a pipe dream here, and you have no demand. I mean, you have no choice. The irony is they're like, oh, that's so horrible. People would do that. Okay, I have an idea. Let's not hire people, and then let's have consumers drown and not be able to get loans. That's a really good choice.
Eddy, I'm going to ask you a pointed question, because I heard Bob Brooksmith speak at the Housing Wire Summit. I was there a week ago tomorrow, and he talked about the Democratic administration and the Republican administration, and reading between the lines, he basically said, go with the devil you know versus the devil you don't know, meaning there is the compliance factor on the Democratic side, but the actions have been very limited. Whereas with the Republican administration that would be coming in, they would likely get the GSEs out of conservatorship. And while there would be less regulation, there would be more chaos. Where do you line up? I mean, are you in a position where you want to tell us what you think is best for this industry while we've got so many eyeballs watching this?
So I'm one that usually answers things a little bit different in the sense. I don't really look at what just is good for this industry. I look at what's good for this country, because at the end of the day, that's the ultimate consumer, and that's the ultimate infrastructure that you got to protect on what's in the best interest for this country.
For sure.
All. This is a tough one, because I don't know if I believe that Republicans would take them out of conservatorship, because I've been hearing that forever. Until it happens, I'm not sure it ever will happen. I think that is great noise. I think both of them like to do political theater. I think both of them dance on a lot of lines. And I have more of a moderate mindset, always have. That's more of a cultural thing that I grew up with, where fiscally responsible, socially, not really caring. There's certain things that I don't think the government should be involved in. As well as I think there's a lot of double standards that get put out there, and a lot of people like to twist things and manipulate them and propaganda. When it comes to what I think is in the best interest of this country, I always look at it from a blueprint standpoint. Who has the better blueprint for the next 4 years? That's really the way I look at it when it comes to presidential. Internally, like your own state senators and representatives, that's a little bit different there. That also has to do with who you are, as well as the local people have way more of an impact on you than even the federal level.
All right, let me jump into another area, because you're not going to tell me who you're voting for, so that's fine. Yimby.
No, I was actually going to go there, but that's fine.
Well, go ahead.
I think on this go around, the Republican blueprint is better.
Okay.
On the last one, I had the Democratic blueprint. The previous time before that, I've been all over it. 2008, I thought the Democratic blueprint was better. 2012, I thought it was Republican. So I keep switching back and forth because I think I'm not the only person like that. I think a lot of people can't really figure out what to make of each of them. I think each of them talk a good game. However, I just still haven't seen the results that I believe are going to be in the best interest for this country collectively by one group. I think there's just a huge challenge, and there's too many levers that they try to pull and too much emotions, even though we've got to get out of that old guard. But yeah, on this go around, I think the Republican blueprint is going to be better for this country. Let me be very honest.
I will say I voted both myself. So I've gone back and back and maybe forth again this time. So you and I have a lot of similarities, aside from being great dressers and not being 6'3". We've got other things in common as well. Well, I'm going to wrap this up in a second, but a couple quick things. Getting underserved communities into homes. This has been a challenge. I think the NAR settlement is pushing them out even farther in the distance.
Mm-hmm.
How do we reconcile that? Do you have any hope that we can get underserved communities and minorities into home ownership sooner than later?
Well, I think from a demographic standpoint, the Latino community is going to force it one way or another. I was at the NAREP convention in San Diego, and they're pretty much projecting for the next 5 to 7 years, the first-time homebuyer market and second-time homebuyer market is going to be made up of something like 50 to 70% Latino. So it's how are you going to get them in there? I think it's going to be forced. I don't think it's going to be some sort of magic law, some magic silver bullet. I just think that people are going to find a way. I think it's going to be willed into victory. You're even seeing now that EXP, the largest real estate, is now the CEO is Leo Pareja, who is also former NAREP president. You have Reels that's growing, and you also have a new group, ROA, Realty of America, that was actually started by people in NAREP. So you're now starting to see a lot of that Latino leadership because of how important that demographic is to all associations. So you got to think about EXP, the largest real estate firm, has a CEO Latino. You have ROA that I know is going to grow. You have Reels that has a lot of influence there. I just think that the market, and more importantly, what I've said from day one, if you want to get more minority home ownership, you have to start at the originator level, the sales level. And I think that's where the real estate market has done it well. I think that's where our industry has failed. You've got to get more and more people that look like certain people as your sales staff. That's what is going to break the barometer. Now, the good thing is, like when it comes to Latino, some people are like, I don't speak Spanish. Trust me, a lot of people that go to the NAREP that are Latino don't speak Spanish either. Only because I wind up talking to them and I realize that I do understand Spanish and they don't. It's maybe a process, or maybe somebody you have on staff, maybe even the agent or one of their older children translate. Either way, I think just sheer force is going to lead to it. Point and blank.
Final thoughts. What are we leaving on the table here? What have we not brought up that you'd like to discuss? What are your parting words to the industry, retail, wholesale, everyone?
Don't fall into the gangland turf. Just don't. It doesn't. And also make sure to get your language right. It always drives me a little crazy. And I said it a few weeks ago in another interview, when somebody categorizes retail as all encompassing one, there's a big difference between consumer direct and retail. Huge difference. I mean, that's like trying to say, and then when it comes to wholesale, it's like trying to compare Target to Costco and consumer direct to Amazon. Like, they're not all three the same. They're vastly different, and you need to understand that. And you also need to understand their roles. You hear a lot of people talk about, I'm going to lose my refis. Yeah, consumer direct is trained for that. It's literally what they are trained to do. They are trained to be refi machines. And if you haven't stayed in touch with your client, because more than likely it was transactional to you because you're more concerned with the real estate agent that gave you the business, and this is for any originator right here. I'm talking about all channels here. Yeah, you're going to get picked off by consumer direct, because if you didn't stay in touch with these people because you're more in touch with the agent, like I said, imagine it's not really a relationship if you never follow up with people and stay in front of them and not provide any value. So
that's a great point. I asked you where the industry is going to be in 3 to 5 years. Where do you hope EPM is in 3 to 5 years? What are your goals? Are you one of those people that looks out 3 years and says, I want to get to this billion or that billion. I know you want to treat your people great and build a community of, out of love, which is what you're all about. But what are the objectives here?
Yeah, no, I'm not, I'm not transactional. That's a very transactional, I think a lot of people are transactional without being aware of it. Say, no, I got to get to this number, this number. Key is very simple. You got to focus on the process. You got to focus on what you're doing to get 1% better every day. What are you doing from a vision standpoint? What are you doing from business development? How are you measuring your numbers? How are you looking inside your organization to the internal partners? How are you looking to the external partners to affect them to add value? Whatever number you're going to get to, you're going to get to it by really focusing on your four walls and your macro. I mean, your micro, not the macro. And that's what you got to really, really keep your eyes on, is your four walls. I think that any number you throw out there is possible, outside of something crazy that nobody's done. I think anything can be done. I think it's just willing to be how far you're willing to go. Nobody ever stopped you from accomplishing your goals except for yourself.
Yeah, well, you're coming up on 17 years since you founded EPM. Congratulations. You've made it through a lot of ups and downs, and you continue to give back to the industry on behalf of all of us in the industry. Thank you so much for all that you've done and continue to do. Eddy Perez,
My pleasure.
founder of EPM. Coming up next Monday, Marcia Davies will be with us. She's the COO of the MBA. She is also the founder of Empower. What an impressive group of ladies are in that group. And we're going to talk all about it and dig in as we're getting closer to the MBA annual. I know I'll see you there, Eddy.
Yep.
Have a wonderful week. Appreciate your time. We'll see everybody next Monday, 1 o'clock Eastern on One-on-One.
Cool. Thank you.